Welcome, everyone, to the interview about advocacy. And we're interviewing Andy. She is a lobbyist, and she will explain how a lobbyist works and how advocacy is related to being a lobbyist.
The material and information presented here is provided by Lived Experience Youth and for general information purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are of the guests of our podcast own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Youth Move.
That's great. Thank you, Savannah. And if you have any questions as I go along, Savannah, just don't hesitate to ask. So I'm Andy Leopoldis. I have been a paid lobbyist in Colorado since 1988, which is a really long time, but I really enjoy the work and the challenge. I think it's important for me to explain to you how I got started so that you don't think there's some mystery about being a professional lobbyist. In 1983, my 3-year-old son was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. And it's a chronic disease. He's 43 now and still has diabetes. And I was a stay-at-home mom. And my husband worked. I had a daughter that was 2 years older than my son. And I joined the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation out of New York as something to do so that I could do more than meal plan and give him a shot. So when I joined the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, they had a government relations committee. And because I had such a young child, they kind of jumped on it and said, we really want you to come to Washington and tell your story about living with a child with diabetes. So 4 times a year, they would fly me into Washington. They would tell me what to say and who to say it to. And I would do that. I wasn't paid. I was a volunteer. And I did that for 10 years. And at the end of the 10 years, my son was in first grade. We had moved to another city, but I went back to my legislator who served in the state house and was talking to him about advocacy and what I was doing with the Diabetes Foundation. And he said, you need to stop doing that and stay in Colorado. And naively, I said, well, they don't raise money for diabetes research in Colorado. And he said, no. Find a client and I will walk you through what happens. And in fact, he did. So I'd been a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, had not worked. I had a college degree, but I felt it was important to stay home and wasn't very trusting of daycare to take care of my son. So I started applying for jobs and I came across a community relations job at a provider to people with developmental disabilities. And I joined their staff as community outreach. And about 6 months into that job, one of my responsibilities was to go to their statewide meeting of all the providers. And at that time, they were deciding if they were going to get a lobbyist and what that job description would look like. Well, from my volunteer experience, I knew what the job description should look like. And at that meeting, they said, why don't you just apply for the job? And my boss at the time said, yes, she thought I could do the community relations job and the lobbying job, each of them part-time. And that would benefit their agency as well. And so I did. And for 10 years, I lobbied on behalf of people with developmental disabilities. And towards the end of the 10 years, I had gotten really curious. So I sat in on a lot of other meetings and found there were a lot of other things that I was interested in, like child welfare and like other healthcare issues. And I started getting referral from different entities that knew me from the Capitol and wanted to know if I would represent them. And so that's how it happened. And that's how I'm here all these years later. So I didn't start as a professional lobbyist. I learned to do it as a volunteer. So I tell you this because there's really no mystery or no one way to become a lobbyist. So I think it's helpful if I explain the difference between advocacy and lobbying, because they're not very different and they do get confused. But there are some rules about what a lobbyist can do, what a lobbyist can't do, and an advocate can't. So an advocate is typically somebody who's conveying information or educating policymakers or community members on a certain issue. A lobbyist, on the other hand, is also an advocate for issues, but they're trying to influence elected officials to vote the way their client wants. And when I say client, all of my clients over the years have been nonprofits. And so while they could provide the education, I did the persuasion. You have to work very closely together, and there are very important distinctions so that nonprofits don't get into trouble, because the IRS designation of a nonprofit does not allow you to lobby.
Mm.
So a lot of my clients are part of an association, and then the association can put money towards a lobbyist, and the lobbyist then speaks for them, persuading legislators. Where advocates come in is when they testified before elected officials of formal testimony. They're providing information, and they're not spending a significant part of their budget to do the quote lobbying, to do the advocacy.
Oh, okay.
But
So it's
how
kind
did
of
help?
like I kind of think I know what you're talking about. So like a lobbyist kind of like sells an idea to political parties basically to vote on the law or the situation, what's happening. And
Right.
then an advocate is more of just out there for knowledge and like awareness type stuff.
Yeah, they can also be persuasive by telling them how it affects either themselves individually or a group that they work with.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
And so, at
Um,
least if you have that distinction, you'll know nonprofits for a very long time thought they couldn't lobby, they couldn't be at the Capitol. But in fact, they can. It's in the Constitution that factions, they called them factions back then, can persuade elected officials. And so it's your faction, where an advocacy organization is a faction. So now that you know that overview, I wanted to talk about the legislative process and where we fit in to that process. The legislature in Colorado is 120 days. Up until very recently, they were 120 calendar days, which included Saturday and Sundays. But a few years ago, they ran into some issues about making it straight through calendar days, and they decided it was 120 days and they could take a break for a week and come back and start counting the days. So that starts in January and ends in May. During COVID, we stretched it out a little bit longer because they took a break. But generally, it's that January to May. But that's not where the work starts. The work starts the day after the legislative session in May finishes. And the reason I say that is because during the session, we may have found a lot of really good things that we want to build on. And if we want to build on them, we can't really do it while they're in session because they're dealing with pieces of legislation that they've already been working on and now they're going to vote on. So starting in June, we start meeting with legislators, advocates, and lobbyists to talk with them about issues and see how they're feeling about them. So from June to August we're talking with legislators, developing ideas, as you know, that we would hold focus groups. We would ask other collaborative associations what they thought about the bill so that we know if we have support going in. Because you don't want to get into the legislative session and find out that there's a lot of opposition. And then from August to November, you're dealing with legislators who are writing one of their 5 titles. They can only have 5 bills without special permission. So they're running one of their 5 titles, and they're doing the same thing. They're asking their legislative colleagues if they're going to support it and what else would they need. And they'll also find out how much the legislation might cost. And then starting in November, the Joint Budget Committee, which is just what it says, it's the Budget Committee of the legislature, starts their education programs. And that's exactly where we are right now. The governor provides the November 1st budget, his budget for the departments, and they have briefing and hearings by the departments in the governor's cabinets about what they want to propose. So sometimes you find out that your program that was in last year got cut, and then you could start lobbying to have it reinstated. And then obviously we have the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. So there's not lots of things that happen until the legislative session starts. So it really is a year-round job, even though they're only in session for 120 days. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was about to ask, what is the best approach you take in like approaching like mayors and like Congress and like just people of like political parties per se? Because I've been running into a lot of political parties here in Boulder, like the mayor and state representatives and stuff that want to know like what I do and stuff. But then I'm also afraid to say like, I don't know, like what we need. And then they don't like listen to me. Like, like I just get bounced off as like, I'm just a youth or I'm just like, this AmeriCorps Vista person. Like I'm not that important, which I know I am. It's just sometimes I feel like sometimes they don't listen to me. So it's like, I want to find out some kind of better persuasive approach where I, get off my like little speech of what I do and like what I want changed in the community. And then they're just like, oh, okay, I'll take notes and then that's it. Like there's no really follow-up things.
So I have the perfect answer for that is that you may be approaching the wrong person. So what the state legislators pass would not be of interest to the mayor, even though it's down to your community level because you work for a community agency. But if you're trying to affect change, it may not be at the local level. It may be at the state level or at the county commissioner level. And so one of the best things to do is work with somebody who knows all those levels of government and knows where the best place is to to ask for something. You should be able to talk to anybody you want about the generic part of what you do. But if you're asking for them to make change or to spend money, you want to make sure that you're asking the right people for it, for whatever the outcome is that you want.
Okay. Okay,
So
that
you
makes
can
sense.
do education. You can say, here's a really good example that a friend of mine who was a mayor and was a state legislator told me. She said, I like being a mayor because I can see the change that I affect. If I want a stoplight at a certain intersection, I know that when we pass that, we're going to get the stoplight. Well, you wouldn't ask the state legislator for a stoplight
Okay.
because
Yeah,
they don't.
because there's different levels of like
Yes.
power that people
Yes.
have and stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
But you can still educate them and say, we really need children in foster care to have an allowance. That I'm just making that up. To have an allowance. And you might ask the state legislature for that, but you wouldn't ask the mayor for that.
Okay.
So you need to work with somebody who knows the multi-levels of government and what the best message is for each level of government.
How would you go about contacting, or could you even contact like the state legislator just as an actual person? Like, could you just go call them or email them?
Yes, absolutely. These people are elected by you. They are elected by citizens. And if they want to get reelected, it's their own citizens that are going to reelect them. So I tell my clients that when they get ready to talk to a legislator, first of all, make sure it's your legislator or in the area, like you said, you were in Boulder, so you could do all the Boulder legislators. And all of the information is public. All of your legislators at one time or another are listed in your local newspaper and their contact information. And the first thing you should say to them is, I'm so and so, and I'm your constituent. So they should be listening to you.
Okay.
But they're all listed. And again, if you need help, seek help from somebody who has done this and knows the information on how to contact them. This really dates me because I've been doing this a long time, but it took a while before all the legislators used email. We'd have a list of those who do and those who don't, because you'd have to call them on the phone. Now everybody uses email, and that's how they expect to get a message. The other way to get to know your elected officials is they all have breakfast, coffees, teas, town hall meetings. You should go to them. And if all you do is listen to what everybody else says, the information you're going to gain is invaluable, because the next time you want to ask for something, you can say to the elected official, I was at your town hall at ABC Coffee.
Okay.
So
Some
yes,
really great information.
yeah, you can definitely call them. You want to make sure that if you're going to ask them for something or give them information, that you don't ramble, that you know exactly what you're going to say, and have a handout in case they didn't listen carefully enough. Give them something to take home with your name and your organization's name on it. And that's considered education.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I told you that we start at new legislation starting in June for the next legislative session in January. And one of the best approaches to take in legislation is to try and make it personal somehow. You make it personal to the legislator and embrace it yourself. You also want to make sure you've done your research. So in June, and it's a little different during an election year, but in June, I start researching legislators and what their interests are. I'll bet you in the last 5 years, I found 10 legislators that have been foster parents. And it's important to know that, even if I'm not their constituent, because when you approach them, you can say, I know you've been a foster parent and this affects foster children. I'd like to know what you think. So if you've done your research, you can narrow down who you're going to approach. So if you've got a legislator, or if your legislator is a farmer and you don't have a topic that might interest a farmer, that's probably not the person you want to go to with an issue. And there are 100 legislators. There are 35 senators and 65 representatives. The Senate districts are larger than the House districts. So, but there are plenty of legislators who would be interested in your topic, in your issue. But again, do your research before you approach them with an idea. So now I'd like to talk just a little bit about being a lobbyist. There are some unwritten rules about being a lobbyist, and that includes volunteer, which means unpaid, and paid lobbyists. The first one is, it seems ridiculous, but is you need to tell your elected officials the truth. They don't have aides. They don't have legislative aides like they do in Congress. Congress is a little bit different than state, uh, county, and city. But you want to make sure that you tell them the truth because they're going to take your information and use it because they don't have the staff to do the research. So if you want to stay in this area and be credible, the very first thing you want to do is tell the truth. I have I have oftentimes said to legislators who say to me, "What's the other side of this?" And I have to tell them, and the other side may be more attractive than my side. My side may be more in need. The other thing is you want to be ethical. So you don't want to slam somebody else. You certainly don't want to slam another elected official. You want to tell them, I visited Representative XYZ and she said this and that and this and that. But be truthful again when you say it. Don't embellish it because they'll find out. So there are no written rules for lobbyists. There are rules, but it's more on how to do the lobbying. What are the day-to-day things to do the lobbying? And that's published in the state rule packet under the Secretary of State. Lobbyists also have to register. You have to register if you consider yourself an unpaid lobbyist or a paid lobbyist. You have to list your clients, how much they paid you, and what issues they're interested in. So it's very transparent. It's also on the Secretary of State's website, and anybody can go look it up.
Okay. That is all very, very awesome information to know in case anybody does want to go be a lobbyist or at least contact their legislators or anything like that. That's awesome. I know when I was young in Indiana, tried to contact the senator at the time. It was Mike Pence, whenever he was. And he actually wrote back to me and it felt in a way like he didn't care because of what he said, but then it felt in a way that at least he contacted me back because that was like the main goal. It was to even have an answer about some stuff I was like trying to do in Indiana and raise awareness towards, poverty and stuff. And come to find out later, I learned this year that they have no plans to improve any of the homeless lives or anything like that. They said that they don't want to improve anything because that's just encouraging homeless behavior. So it's like I'm so glad I'm out of that state because it was just I feel like even if there was a big advocacy movement, like nothing would change in Indiana.
Well, there are topics that are not of interest
Yeah.
to many legislators. But, out of 100 people, you ought to be able to find one champion.
Yeah.
I really recommend that you do your homework and figure out what their background is, maybe look to see what else they've passed. And if they're not interested, ask them if they know somebody that's interested. We have leadership roles in the legislature, and oftentimes those leaders will say, "Well, I know so and so is involved in this," and you may not have read that anywhere. But we do have a really diverse General Assembly, and I think you would find at least a few people open to any topic. I will tell you, they are very open to the homeless topic in Colorado.
Yes. Yeah.
What else would be helpful for you to know at this basic level?
I don't know. I think you answered all of my questions. I can't really think of anything else because you explained like what the difference is from regular advocacy and being a lobbyist. You explained what they did, like just the general explanation. And then we went over like the approach to taking legislation. Did we talk about well, yeah, we did. How does lobbying work? So I think we covered everything.
So maybe it would be helpful to tell you what I'm doing right now. So it's not like I get to sit on my hands until the legislature session starts. Right now, the Joint Budget Committee is doing education sessions on all of the line items that are in the state budget. So, line items for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with mental health issues, child welfare, behavioral health, all of those are line items. They all get funded by the state government. And so there's a discussion with the 6 Joint Budget Committee members. So my job right now is to look at those or attend those briefings and then hearings or by the departments before the legislature starts and share that with my clients. So I don't do direct care and I don't work in an agency. My full-time job is to be paying attention to what's going on at the Capitol. And so I'm helping my clients understand what could be coming up in the next session based on these educational sessions by the Joint Budget Committee. They hold these with a different topic every day, and they hold them every day until the session starts. They are taking the week between Christmas and New Year's off, but otherwise it's every day and a different topic. And I don't have clients in every topic, so I don't have to sit there for 30 days and listen to all kinds of other things. And then when the session starts is when I make sure that I renew relationships and that I share my information with my sponsors, somebody who's going to carry the bill that I've been working on, and try and gather support from other legislators. I'm also working on advocacy groups that have similar interests to my clients and asking their lobbyists how they're going to vote or how they're thinking of supporting bills. If you're talking about work at the county level, your audience are the county commissioners. And again, they don't have legislative liaison either, but you might want, so a county issue might be zoning. You might want to put a group home someplace in a neighborhood that doesn't really want it. And the opponents are talking to the county commissioners, where my client is talking to them about the other side of things. So again, I'm focused right now on the legislature, but year round, you might want to have something done at the city or the county level.
Oh, okay. Also, I was just curious, is there like a time limit that a certain topic could be repeated in a like a briefing, where it could be like something like that already went, like they went over and then they just like didn't approve it? Could it just come back and just keep like being persistent, or do they have to wait like 30 days or 90 days to come back with the same topic?
No, there is no limit. The challenge would be in the same session if you didn't have a sponsor. So you could bring it back. Sadly, sometimes a Republican will run a bill and the Democrats will kill it. And then the Democrats pick up the topic.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. So generally, though, if your bill dies in the legislative session, you can bring it back the next year. You can also amend bills. I had a bill when I very first started. I had a bill that gave money to an advocacy group. And when we tried to implement it after the session, we couldn't do it. It wasn't written the way we thought it was going to be. So we had to amend it the next session so that it could be implemented.
Oh, wow.
So you can bring it back. I have had bills. So let me back up. So our legislators and our county commissioners are term limited in most cases, which means that they can only serve a certain amount of years. So if 12 years, maybe the legislature is fully turned over and they don't know the story behind the legislation that passed 15 years before because they weren't here. And so they may think they have a bright idea and they're going to run something that was run 15 years ago. Only times have changed. And so now they're going to run it to fit the times and the interests. So there is no time limit on running issues.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all my questions for this topic. I wrote some notes down too, just for myself, just to have more information about this.
Well, I appreciate being invited. If you end up during the next 6 months of the legislative session having more in-depth discussion that you want, just let me know.
Okay, I will. Thank you. This concludes our interview about advocacy and what a lobbyist work is and how that correlates to each other. Thank you, Andy, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, have a great day.
Thanks.